Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Skull Servant Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for June 2023. I always like updating the Skull Servant deck. It feels like one of those decks that a lot of people are fans of. It hasn't changed much since the last update, but I do like to keep it up to date with just the overall changes I make, because it is a deck that I use very often, just being one of the more simple decks to use for people looking to play some pretty basic and fun Yu-Gi-Oh! Games against you. You don't even have to utilize an extra deck if you don't want to, so there are the many different ways you can just, play the deck and not really have to go full power against your opponent and just have more of a fun play style with this deck altogether. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. Now, the big thing with the Skull Servants is that a good majority of them share the name Skull Servant or King of the Skull Servants while in the graveyard. So we're still running our three go-to main boss monster, which is Skull Servant, just as another easy setup card in the graveyard for you to then power up your next monster, which is the main play in the entire deck to begin with. But Skull Servant just adds a little bit more of an engine to the deck as well, because you can use a Link Spider with it to get out a special summon of any additional copies of Skull Servants you may have had in your hand as well, giving you some extra deck monsters and setting up Skull Servant in your graveyard also. And we're also running our main go-to boss monster in the deck, which is King of the Skull Servant. The original attack of this card is the combined number of King of the Skull Servants and Skull Servants in your graveyard times 1,000. And when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish one other King of the Skull Servants or one Skull Servant from your graveyard to special summon this target. So with King of the Skull Servants, it's that big boss monster that you use against your opponent to be able to have a high attack point monster with all the other different Skull Servant monsters in your graveyard, making this attack stronger and stronger. And the multiple Skull Servants or King of the Skull Servants you have on the field, the more of a big boss monster you can also utilize against your opponent, and one that if your opponent does try to attack over, it can just easily come back onto the field again. And we're also running 3 copies of White Mare. With this card, its name becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard. And you can discard this card to activate one of the following effects. You can target one of your banished Skull Servant or White Mare, return it to the graveyard. Or you can target one of your banished Lady in White or King of the Skull Servants and special summon it. So giving you an answer to summon your boss monster that may be banished is another great thing with this card. Just being able to discard it as well to activate this effect. Jin just gives you another one set up in the graveyard for you to power up the King of the Skull Servant you brought back. And we're also running 3 copies of the Lady in White. With this card, it face up level 3 or lower zombie monsters on the field, except for the Lady in White, cannot be destroyed by battle and are unaffected by spell and trap effects. And this card's name becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard. So while not being a level 1 monster, we get some of the plays limited for what we can do for our Skull Servant cards, but while in defense position on the field, it adds for more of a protection to your other Skull Servant cards you may on the field have and want to keep on the field, while it's okay if Lady in White ends up going to the graveyard, because then it just powers up the King of the Skull Servant once again. And I also run 3 copies of White Princess. This card's name becomes Skull Servant while it is in the graveyard. If this card is normal or special summon, you can send one White Prince from your deck to the graveyard. And during either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard. All monsters currently on the field lose attack and defense equal to their own level or rank times 300 until end of turn. So this could actually be pretty easily utilized in the current metagame, just with the high level monster count in decks like Kashtira and also with Albaz. Not that the Skull Servant attack play would be a really good one to utilize against them, but a lot of them are running, monsters between the levels of 7 and 8, and then this card just being able to lower those monsters' attacks mean you have a better shot at doing more damage with your King of the Skull Servant against those cards to begin with. And for the fact that this card sets up White Prince in your graveyard as well, just means more and more send effects for this card to use also. And 3 copies of White Baking. This is the newest Skull Servant to the deck. It becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard. If a level 3 or lower zombie monster would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can discard this card instead. And if it's sent to the graveyard, you can add 2 monsters with different names from your deck to your hand, except for White Baking, that are either Skull Servant or specifically listed in the text. So giving you a search for the majority of the monsters that we're running in the deck thanks to this card as well. And then you discard 1 card. So giving you more of a setup in your graveyard as well. But White Baking being able to protect some of your other monsters means that you can keep cards that are protecting your monsters to begin with on the field if your opponent does try to get over those cards by other means. And then the last of the Skull Servant lineup, just 2 copies of White Prince. If it's sent to the graveyard, you can send 1 Skull Servant and 1 Lady in White from your hand and or deck to the graveyard. And you can banish 2 Skull Servants and this card from your graveyard to special summon 1 King of the Skull Servants from your deck. So you do take a big hit with your graveyard setup thanks to this card, but it does get you a King of the Skull Servants that much more quickly from your deck out onto the field. And also this card can just be sent with White Princess, and then when you send it off of White Princess, you have the additional send of a Lady in White and another Skull Servant, so that could be the entire cost right then and there for the special summon without having to take any other cards out of the graveyard. And I also run 3 copies of Mizuki. When you can banish this card from your graveyard to target 1 zombie monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. All of the Skull Servant cards are zombies, so just being able to special summon back to the graveyard by setting up the Mizuki in the graveyard as well is just an added plus for you to use. And it's also not a once per turn, so if you have multiple King of the Skull Servants in your graveyard and the multiple Mizuki, you just have more and more special summons thanks to this card. With the last monster in the main deck just being 1 Armageddon Knight, it's an additional monster send to the graveyard. If you wanted to mix around some of the numbers, you could put in a 3rd copy of White Prince, taking out the Armageddon Knight for that final spot. But for the spell cards, I run 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. Now, normally you'd think it'd be taking away from the actual graveyard setup with this card if you were to banish one of your Skull Servant monsters, but cards like White Mare can get back your banished cards, so as long as you banish a Skull Servant or a White Mare, or just the banish of Lady in White or King of the Skull Servants with Allure of Darkness, you can use this card to at least get them back after they've been banished as well, since the banished card will be face up thanks to this. I also run 3 copies of Symbol of Heritage. It's a really good card in the deck just because you can only activate this while there are 3 monsters in the card name with the same in your graveyard. You select one of those monsters and special summon it to your side of the field and equip it with this card. And when this card is destroyed, destroy the equipped monster. So it's almost like a premature burial for your Skull Servant cards. Since they're all treated as Skull Servant while in the graveyard, you can use this card very easily while you just have 3 of them in the graveyard, and it gives you that premature burial effect onto the field, and then just the additional play that when that monster is destroyed or when this card is destroyed, you lose it, but still 3 of this card for the added special summon play. For more back row clearing play as well, running 2 Twin Twister, you want to be able to attack into your opponent with your King of the Skull Servants with no fear. So I like to run Twin Twister because it can also set up more Skull Servants in your graveyard with the discard of this card. And as a quick play card can be used if your opponent tries to set cards on the end of their turn, you have this card set, and then you can just destroy them without them trying to activate them in response. And then for some of the one-ofs for the spells, I run 1 copy of Call by the Grave, 1 copy of Monster Reborn, 1 copy of 1 for 1, 1 Foolish Burial, and 1 Burial from a Different Dimension. Burial from a Different Dimension, especially being useful for being able just to place those banished cards, whether they be from Allure of Darkness, the White Prince banished special summon, you name it, back into the graveyard for you just to power up your King of the Skull Servants or for you to reuse other card effects over again. And then the only trap that I run in the deck, if you wanted to, you could run Infinite Impermanence in this spot, but being more of a fun build lineup, I'm running 3 copies of Needlebug Nest. You send the top 5 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So if your opponent tries to attack over your go-to King of the Skull Servants, and they just have that final right amount of attacks to do so, you can send the top 5 cards of your deck to the graveyard, potentially getting more Skull Servants in your graveyard for you to use with King of the Skull Servants, powering this card up, and then making it so your opponent just crashes their own monster into what they thought would be the stronger monster. And Needlebug Nest can also set up more Mizuki in your graveyard for you to use against your opponent also. And then for the extra deck, I run 2 copies of Link Karibo because level 1s are a good majority of what we use. It gives you a monster for defensive purposes on the field and sets up more, Skull Servants in your graveyard for you also. The 1 copy of Link Spider for the normal monster special summon play, as I said before. The 1 copy of the Dark Charmer Gloomy. 2 copies of Wee Witch's Apprentice, just an added attack boost for your monsters on the field also. And then also 1 copy of Nightmare Cerberus, 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix, 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, and the 1 copy of Apollosa, Bow of the Goddess. And for the Xyz monsters, 1 copy of Sylvan Princess Sprite, 1 Slacker Magician, 1 Kinkangashi Fucho, and the 1 Divine Arsenal Zeus to overlay on top of these Xyz monsters also. And as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, it all comes down to the setup of what you may open up. Let's say you have the Skull Servant play, like I mentioned before, in your hand. With this play, you can at least go for the normal summon of your Skull Servant onto the field. So this would be probably the worst brick scenario if you just get the 2 in your hand. So with this, at least you can summon out your Skull Servant, then go for the Link Spider play, using the Link Spider to special summon a level 4 lower normal monster from your hand to a zone this card points to, so then you'll get the other Skull Servant on the field, and then from here you can go for another additional Link 2, and then summon out either the Wee Witch's Apprentice or the Dark Charmer, or you can even go before that and go for the Link Spider play, special summoning out 1 additional Skull Servant, and then use that Skull Servant for the Link Karibo play from your hand, also giving you those 2 monsters while setting up 2 other Skull Servants in your graveyard. Could be what you need just to begin the other engine of your play, depending on if you had a trap to set up on the field as well to set up more cards in your graveyard, or if at least the following turn you open up cards like White Princess, and with this card sending a card like White Prince to the graveyard, and then from there getting more and more search in your graveyard for you to utilize, sending more and more of your cards, giving you a 5 total count there, or even just the additional play of sending with the Banish for White Prince to summon out the King of the Skull Servant onto the field thanks to that card, and then using your other monsters on the field, you can use the Link Spider and the White Princess in the graveyard to go for the special summon search of Wee Witch's Apprentice, having the defensive Link Karibo, and then the 3 additional Skull Servant cards in your graveyard, making your King of the Skull Servants at 3,000 attack with a 500 boost of Wee Witch, 3,500 attack in total. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, I always like to update the Skull Servant deck. It's just a fun deck to play, one to easily pick up as well. And hopefully maybe we'll see some new different support members for the Skull Servant family as well later down the line. But as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And Kira Twig out.